Hello everyone, you're very welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about how to research personal retirement savings accounts or PRSAs in Ireland. PRSAs have become a lot more attractive since Finance Act 2022 was signed into law last December. That's because prior to Finance Act 2022, if an employer made a contribution to an employee's PRSA, that contribution will be counted towards the employee's age-related contribution limit. In addition, if the employer's contribution resulted in the employee's age-related contribution limit being breached, a taxable benefit in kind would arise. No such rules were applicable to employer contributions made to an employee's occupational pension scheme, thus making occupational schemes much more favorable than PRSAs from a tax perspective. The tax rules were changed and PRSAs were brought in line with occupational pension schemes. PRSAs are primarily intended for three groups: self-employed individuals, employees in non-pensionable employment, and employees in pensionable employment who are making additional voluntary contributions or AVCs. In other words, irrespective of your employment status, it's very likely that you could, in some way, shape, or form, benefit from having a PRSA. That begs the question, how does one go about finding a PRSA to invest in? Before we answer that question, it's very important to be aware that your employer is legally obligated to nominate a PRSA that you can invest in if any of the following conditions apply. A, your employer doesn't offer an occupational scheme. B, you're included in a scheme for death and service benefits only. C, you are not eligible to join your employer's occupational scheme within 6 months of your start date. Or D, you're included in an occupational scheme that does not permit the payment of additional voluntary contributions. The reason why I bring this up is because if you choose to use the PRSA that your employer has nominated, all of your contributions to that PRSA will be deducted from your paycheck and you will be granted tax relief at source. This is the ideal situation. However, if you choose to use a PRSA that isn't your employer's nominated PRSA, then you'll very likely have to pay your contributions with after-tax money and claim tax relief via your tax return. So if your employer's nominated PRSA is competitive fees-wise and it offers exposure to the assets that you want to invest in, then it's advisable to stick with that PRSA as opposed to sourcing a PRSA yourself. But you'll still need to do the necessary PRSA research to figure out whether or not that's the case. When researching PRSAs, you should always start by heading over to the Pensions Authority's website and checking out their dedicated page for PRSAs. There are 4 useful documents on this page. I'd highly recommend reading the Consumer and Employer's Guide to PRSAs, as it tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the product. It is 38 pages long, but it's regularly kept up to date and it will answer a lot, if not all, of the questions that you might have about PRSAs. The Schedule A statistics provide some interesting data around the total value of PRSA assets in Ireland, which stood at €8.9 billion at the end of 2022, as well as the total number of PRSA contracts in existence. Interestingly, the data suggests that just under 30% of employer-nominated PRSAs are actually in use, which, if you think about it, is pretty abysmal. However, the last 2 documents are the highlight of the page: the PRSA Providers and Products Register and the PRSA Products and Charges Excel. The register document will show you all of the PRSA providers that are currently registered in Ireland. More importantly, it will tell you how many PRSAs each provider has available, whether these PRSAs are standard or non-standard, and it will give you a point of contact for the PRSA provider so that you can reach out with any questions that you may have. For those of you wondering, the differences between standard and non-standard PRSAs concern charges and investment selection. With standard PRSAs, there is a maximum contribution charge of 5% per contribution and a maximum fund charge of 1% per annum. Non-standard PRSAs, on the other hand, are not subject to maximum charges, but they offer a wider investment selection than standard PRSAs. As you can see, each PRSA has a reference number that begins with APP. This reference number can be useful when you're communicating with either your financial advisor or the PRSA provider directly about a particular PRSA, as many of the PRSAs have similar names. You should also be able to find your employer's nominated PRSA on this list using its reference number. The PRSA Products and Charges Excel is where you'll find centralized information about the charges associated with each of the PRSAs on the register. Each PRSA provider has their own tab where the contribution charges and fund charges associated with each PRSA that the provider offers numbers is shown. Taking Zurich as an example, you can see for this first PRSA, the contribution charge you'd pay would depend on how much you're investing. If it's less than €6,000 per annum, you'd pay 5%, i.e. the maximum allowable charge. If it's between €6,000 and €12,000, you'd pay 4.25%, and if it's more than 12 grand, you'd pay 3.5%. You can also see that the annual fund charge for this particular PRSA is 1%. However, as you can see, there are other Zurich PRSAs that have lower charges than the first PRSA. For example, this particular Zurich PRSA has no contribution charge and has an annual fund charge of 0.75%, which at face value is much more attractive. Before making any decisions, there are a couple of questions that need answering. Number one, is this PRSA even available to you in the first place? Number two, does this PRSA offer exposure to the assets that you want to invest in? Number three, are there any hidden charges that might make this PRSA less attractive? Number four, does this PRSA offer a better selection of investments at a better price than your employer's nominated PRSA? And number five, is there another PRSA offered by a different provider which offers better selection and value for money? These are the kinds of questions that you need to answer. Obviously, this Excel tells you nothing about investment selection, just charges. If it were me, I'd pick 2 or 3 low-cost PRSAs from this spreadsheet. I'd go and see what kind of investment selection those PRSAs offered. I'd compare the charges and investment selection of my selected PRSAs to my employer's nominated PRSA, whilst accounting for the benefit of tax deduction at source, and then I'd make my decision. This Excel is updated by the Pensions Authority on a monthly basis, and I'll leave all of the links in the video description. Now let's discuss how you go about researching the investment selection offered within a given PRSA. Google is your best friend in this exercise, and unfortunately, it's just a case of scouring provider websites until you find the information that you're looking for. Taking Zurich as an example, by looking up the Zurich Fund Performance Calculator and by filtering for PRSA funds, we can see all of the funds that are offered within Zurich PRSAs. Clicking on any of these funds will present you with the general fund information as well as the fund fact sheet, which will tell you key information like the top holdings of the fund. Zurich has a document which I'll leave linked in the video description, which summarizes all of the Zurich PRSA funds, whether those funds are available under standard or non-standard Zurich PRSAs or both, the risk rating of each fund, and any additional charges or other ongoing costs associated with the particular fund. That last point serves as a nice segue to a very important understanding. The contribution charge and the annual fund charge aren't necessarily the only costs associated with investing in PRSAs, and that's especially true for non-standard PRSAs. Because Zurich is clearly disclosing the other ongoing costs associated with their funds, you can easily add this figure to your annual fund charge to get a percentage that is closer to the actual total expense ratio of the fund. For example, if you invested in Prisma Max, assuming a 1% annual fund charge, the total expense ratio will be 1.03%. This is the true ongoing cost of your investments. The problem is that not all PRSA providers are as forthcoming with this information, which makes PRSA comparability a challenge. If we look at Davy Select as an example of a non-standard PRSA, we can see a number of additional charges that wouldn't feature in standard PRSAs. For example, you have a dealing charge of 0.75% per annum. You have a 0.06% fee, as well as a €25 foreign transaction settlement charge per trade for instruments listed outside of the UK and Ireland. And then you have the Davy annual management charge, which can vary between 0.5% and 2% on top of any third-party costs like taxes, transaction costs, and external management charges. This is why it's so important to have a good understanding of the costs associated with your PRSA, because at the end of the day, these costs are going to impact your investment returns. Irish Life has a similar webpage to Zurich where you can see all of the funds that are offered within Irish Life PRSAs and their performance. You can view the fund fact sheets to learn more about the different portfolios and strategies that are available. However, Irish Life doesn't seem to be as forthcoming as Zurich with the ongoing charges associated with the funds, which makes it difficult to come up with an accurate total expense ratio for comparisons. Realistically, for standard PRSAs, you're only going to be looking at the likes of Zurich, Irish Life, and New Ireland. So even though the task might seem daunting, it's really just a case of figuring out with reasonable certainty which of these providers offers the best investment selection at the best price. When you start to move into the realm of non-standard PRSAs, PRSAs, then it can become a bit more complex. I'll wrap this video up with a reminder that if there isn't a material difference between the investment selection and price offered by your employer's nominated PRSA and the PRSA that you're interested in, then you should stick with your employer's PRSA. The convenience of tax relief at source is definitely a factor to be considered. If you are sticking with your employer's PRSA, make sure you're going in and selecting the investments that you want your contributions to be allocated towards. If you haven't yet specified where your contributions are to be allocated, then it's very likely that you're sitting in a default investment strategy, which likely isn't the most optimal strategy for you. If you found this video to be useful, can I ask that you take just 2 seconds out of your day to show your support by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing with family and friends. Before you go, you might be interested in this next video, which talks about the best savings account for Irish savers in 2023. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon.